127 years old. So this is going to be 37 years after the birth of Isaac. So Isaac is going to be 37 years old at this point. In Genesis chapter 17, verse 17, it says that Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, "Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?" So when the promise came, Sarah's 90 years old. And so here she's 127 years old now when she dies. So this is 37 years later after that. Abraham is 137 years old. And now here's the interesting part. It says that it didn't say, but they have been in the land of Canaan for 62 years. 62 years. So that is a pretty significant amount of time for them to be sojourning through the land of Canaan. And we know that Abraham is of no small portion. In other words, his presence there would have been felt by everybody in the land. As is evidenced from verse 6, it says, when Abraham approaches them, the sons of Heth here, in this portion of the land, it says, "Hear us, my Lord, you are a mighty prince among us." And they basically say, wherever you want to choose to bury Sarah, you can go ahead and bury her there. So that was the respect that they're showing to Abraham. He's been in the land for a long time. He's a wealthy man, very influential, and exerting his influence through this land. So in Genesis chapter 12, verse 4, it says, Abraham departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. That was the calling of Abraham. So he was 75 when he left Haran, and so 62 years later, and when this is taking place. So they've been in the land for a long time. Now, the purchase plot of the land, let me just show you. Here's our map that we've been working with as we've been going through the last few chapters of Genesis. It is Mamre, which you'll see, if you see the Dead Sea on the right, and Hebron is in red. I highlighted it in red, and Mamre is right next to Hebron. Actually, they're kind of the same place. So there's several names that is given for this portion of land. It says in verse 2, Sarah died in Kirjath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abram came down to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. So you have Mamre, Kirjath Arba, Machpelah, which is the cave that they're going to buy, and Hebron. Those are the names for this particular area. So they're kind of used interchangeably at this point. However, Hebron is going to be the name that is going to stand out. And is going to be extremely important, especially when we come to the time of King David. So when David becomes king in Israel, he actually doesn't get the whole land. He's going to be king in Hebron, in that area. And I have that marked in red. I put it red because that's where Sarah dies, right? That's a good color. So anyway, that's the location there. Hebron is going to be the name that carries the day, if you will. And it's going to grow around that area, and it's going to become a central, important piece of property or city, especially during the time of David. So we have some foreshadowing here going on as to what's going to happen sometime later after this. Now, Abraham, even though they are offering to give the land to Abraham, and even though Abraham is willing, Abraham is promised this land by God. God has promised to give the land to Abraham, and they are willing to give the plot of land to Abraham. He makes a point to purchase it, even after several attempts to be given to him. And I just have to laugh, because if it was any of us or any church in our day, we would, oh yeah, you're going to give it to me? Oh, well, thanks. I just really appreciate that. The Lord's going to bless you. And that's just kind of the mindset that we have, I think, in our culture today, in the church culture, that we ought to be on the receiving end of other people's generosity. And it's not wrong to take other people's generosity. You have to use some discernment here. But we ought not to expect that be the way that we are treated. As a matter of fact, the church should be the one who is generous the one who is giving, the one we were studying about that in Sunday school. Our mindset ought to be, it is more blessed to give than to receive. That ought to be our mindset. Now don't get me wrong. If I'm going to be a giver, somebody has to be a receiver, right? So there's times in which I have to be on the receiving end and graciously accept it, and that's a good thing, because somebody else has the blessing of being the giver, and that's a good thing. And so, there's, like I said, a discernment that has to be here. But we shouldn't go to the world and necessarily expect them to give it to us because we're the church. We should be the one who is willing to go at it and to pay and to be a blessing rather than to expect to be blessed. And so even though Abraham has lived in this land and he's powerful, he probably could have taken it himself. I mean, we saw how he fought against the 5 kings during the time, prior to Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed. Even though he's been in this land, even though they're willing to give him the land, even though God has promised to give the land, God had not yet given the land, and Abraham makes a point to purchase the land at this time. And what we're seeing here is there's a permanence to this. He is buying a plot of land for somebody special who has died in his family, namely his wife. And he's buying this piece of land, and it's in Mamre or Hebron, which is one of the places that has been a special place in the life of Abraham, which I'll explain in a moment. But he's buying it, and he's going to bury Sarah there, which means that it's going to be an important plot of land for the family. And we know that the family turns into what? The nation of Israel, right? So it's going to be an important plot of land. And this is kind of the anchor to the land, or the anchor to this plot is the anchor to the land for this people. And Abraham has purchased it. It belongs to him rightfully, and the small surrounding area there. And so it serves as an anchor there. You'll see 6 times in this chapter, to bury the dead. I want to bury my dead. You can go ahead and bury your dead. 6 times this is said throughout the chapter. There's only 20 verses. So in verses 4, 6, and 8, that's the first little group there. And then in verses 11, 13, and 15, that's the second group there. So it just emphasizes over and over again, this is the place where we're going to bury the dead. And so it becomes a permanent place for them. And this is technically the first part of the promise, or the first part of the land of Canaan that comes to Abraham. And so this is it goes through a big deal here, but it's kind of important in what's going on in this. Now, if you look at the map one more time, I highlighted in green, there should be 4, I highlighted in green 4 areas. And these are the 4 areas in these 4 cities: Shechem, Bethel, Moriah, and Mamre. These 4 areas, these are the places where Abraham built an altar to the Lord. So when he first got to the land, he came to Shechem and he built the first altar there. And God appeared to him and told him, I'm going to give you this land. The very next day, he moves on. It's about 20 miles from Shechem down to Bethel. He goes down to Bethel and he builds another altar there. And then he moves on a little way. He comes down to Mamre eventually. And Mamre is going to be an important part. He built another altar there. He built an altar in Moriah. And does anybody remember what happened in Moriah? What happened at Mount Moriah? What? That's right. This is where he was supposed to offer Isaac. And he built an altar there in order to make the sacrifice. And instead of offering Isaac, as you know, he offered the ram that the Lord provided that got caught in the thicket there. But these are the 4 places. Moriah is a little exceptional because there's a specific circumstance tied to it. And so you have, basically comes down to Shechem, Bethel, and Mamre. And Mamre is probably going to stand out in the life of Abraham as his place. And he knows about Ephron, and he says, there's this cave at the end of Ephron's field. He knows about it. They know each other. He's been there for a long time. And so that's the part that he wants to purchase in order to bury Sarah. So that's Genesis chapter 23. And it's a short lesson today, because that's just basically what happens in the chapter. Anybody have any questions? Philip?
Do you think they were honestly trying to give it to him, or do you think it may have been more like you can have it?
Culture,
Are you really sure?
It could have been. I saw that suggested. That it was more of a part of the haggling process, that they go through. And, out of deference and respect, but, we're not really intending to give it to you. I saw that mentioned. I don't get that impression myself when I read the chapter. You can't help but read it and see that it seems like it's a genuine offer. But there might be some cultural things that we're not aware of in reading that. So that's a possibility. That's just part of the haggling process. I don't know if haggle is the right word, but, it's part of the process. Did I answer your question? Anybody else have a comment or a question?
Just to split, even just a short lesson, but I hadn't just considered the significance of the location. I'd always read that and just kind of like, that's cool, that's in the Bible, but
yeah, it's like they kind of stumbled upon it or something.
I appreciate the significance of it.
Yeah. Now we also saw that he went down to Beersheba. That's where and Gerar were importing with Abimelech, and so these are places that we've highlighted as we've gone through the story of Abraham. So anyways, that's kind of central to where the whole thing has been taking place. All right, let's move on to prayer requests then. And we have a number of prayer requests.